Hello, everyone, and welcome back to RPA and Intelligent Automation Live. Our next speaker is a real treat. Vinay Mummigatti is the Chief Automation Officer, Data Science Executive, and Digital Transformation Leader for LexisNexis. And he's going to talk to us about hyperautomation powered by process excellence. So before we get into his talk and his introduction, I just want to remind everyone that you can submit questions throughout his presentation. And I'm going to be looking at your questions, and I'm going to picking a few of those questions for the Q&A portion a little bit later on. So you can submit questions on your control panel on the right-hand side. Hello there, Vinay. So Vinay comes to us with more than 20 years of experience leading enterprise automation and digital transformation initiatives at LexisNexis, Bank of America, and United Healthcare. He has led the establishment of enterprise process excellence and automation COEs, pioneering the hyperautomation concepts long before the term was first coined. Vinay is currently the Chief Automation Officer at LexisNexis, responsible for AI, BPM, and RPA strategy and programs. He has an MS in data science from UNC Charlotte and comes to us today from Charlotte, North Carolina. Vinay, great to have you here.
Thank you, Jose. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, all of you. Welcome to the presentation. I hope you can see me and you can see my slides. This is the first time I'm presenting in a virtual conference, so it's a new experience for me. I hope it works out fine, and looking forward to this experience. So the topic today, which I'm going to cover, is hyperautomation and how we are approaching this concept at LexisNexis. So during this presentation, I will cover a few key concepts and then walk you through the journey across our organization. I will share my experiences along the way, both at LexisNexis and the organizations I served before, and I will leave behind a few best practices as we go. So let's start with a quick introduction about LexisNexis. LexisNexis is an information and analytics products company, and we serve legal, corporate, government, and non-government organizations across the world. We operate in 130 countries, and the primary differentiator for LexisNexis is the vast amount of data and content that we collect, we enrich, and we publish. We process about 3 petabytes of data, and which cuts across 65 billion documents. And most of our products and focus is around how do we mine this rich content and produce value for our customers. So looking at what is driving automation for our firm, there are three distinct trends being in the B2B space. One is our customer demand. Our customers are always looking for enriched data and content products so that they can serve their customers better. Secondly, it is a constant pressure on our profitability and ensuring that we can produce better results and continue to have lean processes and continue to bring automation to deliver scale and efficiencies. Last but not the least, we are seeing massive disruption in the industry caused by many startups across legal tech, reg tech, and fintech firms. Basically, they are coming with a lot of speed, agility, and we need to be nimble enough to not only compete, but continue to retain and grow our position. So with a quick context, let's look at what are the needs that are that drive the automation programs for a company. Looking back in my experience, I can go back all the way up to early 2000s when I worked for General Electric, leading the workflow management and document management centers of excellence. It doesn't seem that far long ago when we used to still talk about how do we manage the data, how do we manage the content, how do we create storage and build processes around these aspects. But fast forward about 2 decades, and I still feel that we still have large enterprises. I worked for Bank of America for almost 7 years, and now at LexisNexis, I see that there is a large operational workforce still involved in manual handling of various activities, which cut across processing content, processing conversations, images, various tactical data handling tasks. But underlying business processes continue to be the same pretty much. Our value chains have not dramatically changed. Our business processes continue to be same, but then the way we do work has been constantly changing. Now, what has changed dimensionally is the new technologies that are coming into play. That sets the context for our next topic, which is hyperautomation. Hyperautomation is a very recent term coined by Gartner, and I see there are many versions of understanding and definition floating around. But going back to my experience at Bank of America and now at LexisNexis, we pretty much called this as convergence automation framework to make it a little more realistic, looking at what kind of convergence are we seeing across the automation patterns. And we see that there are distinct patterns that drive the work automation. And trying to abstract it at a very high level, I would see three patterns. One is, how do we orchestrate long-running processes which are connecting multiple departments, data sources, and systems to generate value? Second is the various types of tasks we perform along those processes, which involve repetitive tasks with very structured data. And thirdly, we also have very high-end knowledge and expertise-driven work that is mostly done with knowledge workers, but where the content and the type of data is not very structured and the processes are more intuitive or subjective. So in another dimensional way, we can represent hyperautomation along two axes. One is, if you see the left side vertical axis, we talk about data and process types. So if you see, most of the work we do could be falling under structured or unstructured data and process types. And then if you see the level of human judgment on the horizontal scale, it could vary from highly deterministic to stochastic or very random outcomes. Now, you could map most of the work that we do in any of these four quadrants here. Primarily, if you look at the leftmost bottom quadrant, where we deal with structured data, structured process with very deterministic outcomes, we see a perfect fit for business process management and robotic automation, robotic process automation. And one characteristic of this quadrant is that we can represent these processes in a graphical model, and that basically determines how these processes work. But then as you go outward into the rest of the quadrants, we find that it's very difficult to represent many of the intellectual work or the work that involves a lot of subjective conversations, etc. We cannot graphically represent them, and that is where the element of subjective learning comes into play. And that's a play for cognitive automation, which involves various artificial intelligence techniques. Let's look at another perspective of how hyperautomation can be evolved or can be defined. Hyperautomation is our effort to create technologies and platforms that emulate the human behavior. And when we talk human behavior or human brain, we basically see different functions that we perform in a normal day, all the way from understanding the language to create reasoning and solving problems, applying analytics and computational techniques, and all the while continuously learning. This is what humans do. We basically sense, we think, and we act. So this paradigm of sense, think, and act is what drives hyperautomation. Now there are different technologies as we speak. We just heard a great presentation by Eric on robotic process automation. But RP is just one of the techniques that we look at in the hyperautomation space. There are chatbots, there are intelligent process automation platforms, natural language processing, intelligent character recognition, and so on. Now, it is like we are solving various problems with discrete technologies. It is like running a business with many brains running with each of these individual technologies. What binds all these technologies together is the concept of hyperautomation, which is built on the foundation of a common process and a common architecture. So let's look at why hyperautomation is not only a concept, but it is increasingly becoming essential for enterprise success. So some of the barriers that I have seen in implementing automation over the years is that many organizations are not really set up for a hyperautomation as a program. And what it means is that we don't have measurable outcomes for investments that we track in automation. We keep investing in technologies just because we saw that, oh, we have to invest in RPA. We keep on investing in RPA, but then we don't realize that, oh, there are many other patterns that are not solved with RPA. So it becomes a hammer and nail approach. And operationally also, we are not structured in the right way. And then comes the technology aspects where we don't have defined technology standards. We don't have ability to decide when to use what technologies or architectural principles. And last but not the least, it is the process. If you look at many organizations, we are defined in an evolving way where each operation is very siloed. But when you look at the end-to-end business process, there is no single ownership. And that is where we start to see challenge around how to implement hyperautomation. And we'll talk more about standardization as we go forward. So this is where we start our journey with what we saw at LexisNexis. Our journey began way early in 2016 when we invested in continuous improvement as an enterprise initiative. And then along the way, we realized continuous improvement can only deliver so much of value through improvements. So we brought in technologies like robotic process automation, and we introduced natural language processing in a very small way in early 2017. And in 2018, we realized this has got a much bigger potential. And with the blessings and the sponsorship from our CEO and CFO, we made an investment in a team called as Center for Automation and Process Excellence. I will keep using the acronym CAPE, which stands for the organization that I lead at LexisNexis. Now, CAPE was formed with a vision to establish automation as a strategic initiative and drive automation programs on the foundation of process excellence across the enterprise. So as we move towards the next steps, we realized that we are doing a lot of automation work. We are deploying hundreds of bots, but then ultimately we are not able to see the end-to-end results, because when I create a bot as a particular step in the process, I'm still not solving the entire process problem. I might have solved a step in the process as a challenge, but then it's not the weakest link in the process. So my process output could still be the same, even though I have applied RPA. That is where we started bringing two concepts. One is end-to-end business process management as a platform, and also a focus on process excellence beyond modeling. And I will explain what we started doing beyond modeling and how Signavio became a key enabler for our efforts. And as we move forward, our focus has been to see how we can scale this effort as we have the right technologies, the right methodologies in place. Now we'll look at how do we create global scalability, reuse, and I will explain a few more concepts around it. So automation technology as a strategy for us is built on the foundation of Signavio, which is our enterprise process excellence platform. And we invested in Signavio as the enterprise platform, but fundamentally the goal for us was to look at the work that's going on in all the continents and across 30 plus countries, and how do we bring a uniformity in the way we are applying automation. And these standards are helping us to drive a single thread of activities across different geographies. For the business process management, we choose Appian as our enterprise platform. And Appian also is a low-code software development platform, which covers another aspect of hyperautomation. For robotic process automation, we have chosen UiPath. And for cognitive automation, because it's an evolving space and we see different patterns, we still continue to have multiple homegrown or custom developed applications, but all within the governance applied by CAPE as a team. So we are deploying many natural language processing and chatbot solutions within the company. And we do have complementary technologies like advanced analytics, monitoring, APIs, and microservices as reusable assets across our automation strategy. So as we deploy automation at scale, we are looking at approximately, we started off with 1,000+ ideas in the later part of 2019, and then we had to filter it down to qualified opportunities, bring the right technologies, define the right business case, And this whole methodology is very critical for us because when you run an enterprise program for automation, it's very easy to not track these opportunities, and eventually we find that we have mushroomed a lot of technical investments, and then we are not able to draw an enterprise value with the investments we are making. So we created a tool called Automation Reporting and Tracking Tool, which is a single window and a gateway to track all opportunities from idea through validation. Now, the way this tool works is everyone who is interested in starting an automation project have to log their ideas in this tool, and it goes through an assessment working jointly with the business partners and my team, wherein we define the qualification and the business value. Then we take it through a common set of standards to define what technologies matter here, and then we go into delivery and then validation of financial results. So the key goal for us is to look at how are we applying automation in a holistic manner and not creating technology debt as we continue to deploy automation in the different parts of organization. So if you see our organization, CAPE as an organization was evolved primarily to support 5 key principles. The fundamental principle was around process excellence. We wanted to make sure that we are not deploying automation without focusing on the process. Secondly, it's about defining the technology standards and making sure we have a repeatable adoption of technologies across whichever country you take. Thirdly, it is about the governance model and making sure we have the right templates, standards, measures of value definition, and reporting. Training and enablement is another pillar, and then a key focus on metrics so that we are reporting the outcomes in a uniform way. So the 5 pillars or organizational functions are headed by a functional leader in my team. And then at the strategic level, we focus on making sure our automation is aligned to digital transformation. There is a clear planning and prioritization of projects, and we make sure that we apply the agile portfolio management and product management principles, which we adopted from Silicon Valley Product Group, making sure that we are constantly maintaining the backlog of automation ideas. And the center of excellence is a key driver to drive a culture of change, culture of automation across enterprise. So virtually all 10,000 employees of the company have access to the trainings and certifications that we run. So we have our own internal certifications, and we want to make sure that our employees are ready for the future of digital workforce. And this is a big program that we have launched. Our solution delivery and cognitive automation functions are pretty much focused on technology expertise, architecture, making sure we have a scalable infrastructure and standards in the technology delivery process. And the process excellence is entirely focused on creating a process-centric organization, providing trainings, enablement, and standards using Signavio as our core enabler. Earlier, I talked about the value of automation, and this is one of the key determinants of success. So when we defined our automation program at enterprise level, initially we saw that it became a little bit of adoption challenge because each of the business units used to decide whether to do automation or not. And that was not a viable option for us because we wanted to drive this at an enterprise level, because this program is not a departmental program, but we have direct sponsorship from the CEO and the CFO and the Chief Operating Officer. So essentially, we created goals and automation-driven efficiency targets, which our CFO communicated to each of the business unit presidents. Now that we had assigned the targets, we also had to give a clear way of measuring how do we measure what defines automation value. And we picked 3 core areas. One is impact on customer experience. Second is operational excellence measured in terms of scalability and efficiencies. Third is about regulatory compliance. The many processes which expose us to regulatory impacts and penalties. How do we make sure that we constantly avoid those through repeatable and standardized processes? Every process that we automate is measured in terms of one of the 2 big areas in terms of either it's a cost impact or it's a revenue impact. So it has to have certain value that finally get connected to the dollars. And thirdly, it's not just enough I say that, oh, I created an automation project and I'm impacting, like say, $500,000 or $1 million of additional revenues, because there's no way we can connect the dots. That is where we focus on operational metrics, which are driven by, we still need to have speed, quality, and innovation metrics that are tracked. So essentially, this is helping us to bring a uniformity in how we track the prioritization of projects, where we make investments, and how we deliver value. So this brings a key area of focus for us. One is, what do we mean by process excellence, and how are we implementing process excellence? So initially, when we were doing automation, we started off with RPA and EI in 2017, and we scaled it in 2018 into business process management. We started realizing that it is not just enough to model our business processes and store them in a Visio or any other graphical modeling tool, because it just doesn't serve the purpose. And our goal has always been to look at how do we bring enterprise level visibility to these process models. And it was not possible. And we ran through an evaluation of different industry level technologies available. We selected Signavio as our partner. And the partnership has been very fruitful in the last 1+ years since we have started working together. And when we implemented Signavio, we spent a lot of time in looking at what does enterprise process modeling mean for us. And it meant creating an enterprise level library structure so that we can define a complete organizational model. We create a taxonomy, and we classify our processes as management or operational or compliance driven processes. We created a metadata model which looked at how do we create data, or how do we capture the data about the folders, about different elements of process, or even in terms of the organizational entities. And then reporting and ongoing access control is another big area. And then dictionary around core capabilities, functions. So we spent good amount of time to define and design these principles. And then, as most of you would know, we have our own standards in terms of how do we classify the value chains versus activity level, file level of definition of process models. And we trained all the business analysts across the organization. And where we are seeing the results today, within a year's time, is that one is we are looking at a very standardized approach. So if you look at any part of the world where we operate, everyone has access to the process models that are being implemented. So not only just visibility, but there are various functions which are global in nature, but they had processes which were varying by individual geographies or customer segments. They're able to now standardize and create global standards for process models. It's also about creating platforms. So we are moving from individual applications to now creating platforms. And this concept is very critical, because earlier, if I was solving for renewals process automation for the North American customer segment, now the same renewals platform is being scaled to European segments, Asia Pacific segments. And this creation of enterprise level capability driven platforms is a concept that is radically changing how we are looking at hyperautomation. And the key measures of success, everything what we do has to result in some financial impacts. And the total cost of ownership we are able to track as 30 to 40% savings in every incremental project we do, and the time to market. So we are tracking and continuously reporting on how Signavio is able to impact the key metrics. So let's look at an example of what does a hyper-automated process look like. I just took an example which probably most of you could relate to as you are exposed to the banking industry. This was a project that we delivered at Bank of America as we matured into more of an hyper-automation state. Client onboarding and know your customer is a process which is prevalent across most banks. And it's also an operationally intensive business process. So when we started looking at this key process, it was primarily driven by compliance, the penalties, and the exposure we had to OCC and Fed. So the first goal for us was to look at end-to-end process, and looking at where does the process begin? What are the different touch points in terms of collecting the data, validating the documents, making sure that we are flagging the risks, and ongoing monitoring of the customer profile. So the various data-centric activities, business rules and policies application, and this whole process, we started looking at business process management as a key platform, because we saw that this is a process challenge, and we started focusing on business process management. But then when we delivered a BPM platform, we realized that, oh, we are still living a lot of work in a manual state. which is creating issues around repeatability, which is creating issues around compliance and as well as cost. And that is where we started introducing RPA at different levels, where we had to bring in data-driven activities. We introduced machine learning and algorithmic treatment of various risk calculation and predictability. And we also brought in chatbots to connect with customers in terms of updating them, as well as asking for more details during different stages of the lifecycle and onboarding. So this was a clear evidence of how we moved from one particular technology into a more holistic approach of a hyper automation as a key approach. And again, I would say that there is no single technology which can solve all the hyper automation opportunities. We constantly need to calibrate what does the digital target state mean for us, and make sure that we are bringing the right set of technologies to achieve that digital target state. So these are some of the applications that we are seeing within LexisNexis world. I would start off with looking at the value chains, which you see on the top. Everything we do has to be aligned to the whole value chain concept. It has to be aligned to the lean value tree, which is part of the agile portfolio management concept. Now, if you see the sales and marketing processes that we are automating, most of these are related to either one is improving the customer experience, or it is also about making our sales force more productive and efficient. And then if you come to onboarding and fulfillment, this was an area which was highly manual in operation centric, and we had disparate operations all over the world. So by bringing in process excellence and standardized automation, combining RPA and BPM, we are able to create end-to-end automation of the onboarding and fulfillment cycle, which we call as global order to cash. And today we are seeing a combination of intelligent character recognition using ABI Flexi Capture, RPA UiPath, and Appian as an orchestration platform, delivering a more holistic solution. Our content and editorial operations is the heart of our value to the customers. And this is where we are looking at bringing in natural language processing. We have deployed about 25 plus NLP projects till date. And I would say that we are breaking many new areas where we are looking at patterns coming out of Google and Facebook and trying to see how we can adopt the latest content processing technologies in the AI space. Customer support is an evolving area for us, and we are looking at how to bring process-driven dynamic case management, AI-driven speech and text conversion, research and sentiment analysis. So we are applying AI across multiple aspects of customer support, but everything ties back to the case management workflow, where we are looking at end-to-end call analysis, call flows, and resulting in a customer satisfaction as an outcome. So one of the key focus for us is not just wait for opportunities that come to us, but constantly keep track of the value chains at the enterprise level and create a discovery process, because we have to keep feeding the pipe. We are already looking at what does our 2021 pipeline look like, because we need to run this as an ongoing program, and we have a lot of opportunities across the board. So we created a discovery tool which basically looks at business unit level key functions. We identify functions by which are customer facing functions, where we are applying data handling work. What are the functions which relate to technology or management? Which are the functions which are more back-end research and validation, which require a lot of analytical and expertise work? So this is just an indicative sample of the functions that we have identified, but the list is far more exhaustive. And then we look at which of these functions are contributing to the revenue and customer experience, and which of these functions also have a large resource pool aligned to them in terms of cost structure. Once we have this baseline information, we work with the business leaders to look at what kind of efficiencies we can drive both on the revenue and cost side as a target. And this is where we decide, before even a technology comes into play, we look at what kind of business outcomes we want to deliver. This drives our digital transformation blueprint, a multi-year approach. And then we come back and look at, if these are the hyper automation technologies that we have in the landscape, where are we today in the application? What are the opportunities where we could look at in terms of potential areas? And this gives us a strategic roadmap for each of the business units to look at metrics driven approach, but also it has a bearing in terms of what technologies have been penetrated, what technologies have potential, and how we should continue to explore and experiment. So this is helping us to guide our approach in terms of continuously feeding the pipeline. This is an emerging area for us where we constantly look at not just audit in terms of are we creating bots which are sustainable from identity access management, but also more important concepts which are coming into play. When we look at automation as a holistic concept, we basically look at bias, we basically look at discrimination, and you are seeing various trends in the market and so our society today, which require us to be fair. So how do we have a holistic framework for ethical and trusted automation, which goes much beyond AI principles? And we have been looking at various standards, like European Commission has its own standards, various US bodies have published their own standards. And we try to be ahead of the curve by putting in our own principles, working with our own audit and compliance teams, and make sure that we are not caught on the wrong side by doing something in automation which comes back and haunts us in terms of either not being fair, or we didn't protect data for our customers, or information security as at risk, or it could be anything that relates to maintainability and manageability of our AI algorithms. And last but not the least, are we impacting the jobs in a wrong way? Because protecting the jobs, helping our employees to build a digital workforce continues to be one of the ethical principles of how we want to automate. Let's look at the key takeaways. Again, I covered a few different topics here, but if I want to leave behind a few thoughts with you, one is automation should not be an end in itself. It has to be means to achieving business outcomes. So always focus on what is it that we are trying to achieve, keeping the customer as a lens, keeping our shareholders as a lens, and then looking at automation to be an enabler. It's a big learning for me personally, because whenever we have gone with automation as an end, we have invariably ended in an outcome that was not desirable. Second is there is an automation of business process and there's a process of automation. We need to look at both these aspects. And the process of automation is about managing the life cycle from an idea through design, implementation, and validation. How do we do it in a repeatable way? What are the checkpoints? How do we bring all the stakeholders and teams together? So that's a very critical piece if you want to scale automation at enterprise level. Third is, as we deploy robotics or as we deploy tactical AI solutions, we should not be creating technology debt. And this is where our focus on process excellence, architectural principles, working with our technology partners becomes very critical for us. And if you look at where hyperautomation is headed, it's still in the nascent stages as a concept, but there's no single technology which you can say, oh, I'm going to buy this technology from the market and I'm going to apply hyperautomation. It has to be thought through in terms of your architecture. It has to be thought through in terms of bringing in the right set of technologies, using process as the key principle. And last but not the least, invest in cross-skill teams, because if you just have RPA trained resources, they always look at every project to be an RPA project. If you have only data scientists, they only look at probabilistic solving of problems. So invest in teams which consist of product management teams, process excellence teams, data scientists, RPA engineers, and teams which can bring the solutions together with a holistic sense. And don't compromise on the governance and change management, because this is where the enterprises finally pay a price if we don't do the right things. Well, I hope the presentation conveyed a few learning aspects for all of you as an audience, and looking forward to any questions.
Vinay, that was terrific. I'm going to ask you to stop sharing your presentation now so that we can see you. And we had a number of great questions that came up during your talk, some of them very specific, some of them a bit more on the strategic level. So, it's great to have a practitioner like you and who has that strategic perspective. You can do all of it. So I'm going to start with a question from Bhaskar here. He was referring back to slide number 9, and I think you showed the different solutions that were applied to in your process. And how do you manage the integration across these different solutions as you're doing hyperautomation? If you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So when we look at hyperautomation as a framework, Most of the RPA implementations that we have done are mostly at the user interface interactions. We don't use RPA as a hardwired integration. Jose, am I echoing here or?
No, you sound good to me.
Okay, fine. Maybe I was hearing my own voice. But where I was going is when you look at creating the AI solutions in the larger process orchestration, we need to define what are the interaction points between the inputs to the algorithms and the outputs from the algorithm, which feed into the whole process value chain. And one of the examples that comes to my mind is we were transforming the fulfillment operations for a large treasury operations group in one of my previous organizations. And the whole process started as trying to analyze the emails. We used to get more than 1 million emails every year, and each email consisted of different requests, which we classified about 100 types of requests. Our goal was to look at each email, analyze the content, and come out with what is the customer really asking us to do. And then we had to integrate it with a case management solution. Now, this was a perfect example of how we started off with accessing those emails, capturing the intent, classifying the emails with the right intent, and moving it into the right case management bucket. And this is where the intent gets transitioned from an AI algorithm into a case management solution. And along the way, the case management solution had RPA, which basically collected all the data pertaining to the customer and setting up the case so that a case worker can take it forward through the life cycle. So it's primarily looking at the flow of data, the flow of intent, and the outcomes that you want, and bringing the right systems together as a part of the process. I hope I answered the question, Jose.
No, that's very helpful. That's very good. Um, Debashish asked about this is a very specific one, so you may have this experience or not. He was wondering about success stories relating to hyper automation in an environment that where you have unstructured data scrapping, and then for in finance, and you did mention one finance related example there, but I think the heart of his question is about does hyperautomation fit in an environment where maybe you have unstructured data?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, there have been multiple examples. And when I look at hyperautomation, in one of the examples, which I would bring it from the order to cash process, which has a financial connotation to it in terms of invoice processing. We used to get invoices, and the invoice documents were many times scanned images or scanned documents. And then RPA was not able to apply a deterministic outcome, and that's where we had to bring in algorithmic approach to looking at classifying the types of invoices and the images, and making sure that we are feeding it downstream into the whole process so that the order can be processed further. So these are some of the areas where we look at application of RPA on top of an unstructured content. And that is where exactly we have to look at a handshake and process as the fundamental paradigm. And then with various initiatives where we have legal documents, where I have to analyze 40 to 400 pages of legal documents, extract the key intent coming from each of the case, like whether it's a citation or whether it is the court or the judge, and then looking at how do I analyze the outcome coming from that particular case law. And that is where we had to apply a lot of algorithmic treatment for an unstructured data.
Very good, very good. This one comes from Mark McDonald. It's a bit more specific, and I hope you can speak to this context. He asks, what level of importance would you place on the CPI efforts in 2016 in terms of impact to your hyper automation efforts? And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the CPI efforts that took place in 2016. Is that something that resonate with you or not really?
Yes, I think the question was related to continuous improvement initiatives, if I'm not mistaken. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's a very good question, and I would like to answer it in two ways. One is continuous improvement is more of a culture and a principle that we still have as a part of my team. We still do a lot of green belt, yellow belt, and black belt trainings and certifications for continuous improvement. But where we have graduated from being continuous improvement focused into more of process excellence and hyperautomation is that if you see continuous improvement, most of the times we are very focused on individual activities in a continuous improvement. It could be as simple as trying to improve the feeding of the printer in terms of how I can reduce the cycle time to go and fetch the paper from the printer. It could be a continuous improvement project, but it doesn't translate into an automation driven financial savings. And you could be doing hundreds of these projects or thousands of these projects. So we started seeing 2 or 3 big challenges if you just rely on continuous improvement. One is continuous improvement is discrete. It doesn't bring a focus on process, which is where the end-to-end business outcomes are delivered. And thirdly, continuous improvement cannot be sustained. I do a continuous improvement project and then I move on. Nobody knows whether my continuous improvement project continues to deliver value year on year or not, because the purpose is served, and maybe who knows, we go back to the same process which we improved 1 year back. So we realized that we need to package continuous improvement as a part of the overall journey towards hyperautomation. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, no, that's very good. That context is very helpful.
Yeah.
Sam asked about if you can talk a little bit more about why you had decided to use a different corporate level software when UiPath has a built-in enterprise level manager software. So I don't know if you can talk about that, or if about without being too specific perhaps about the choices, but strategically, or maybe from a practical standpoint, was there a reason, a rationale for that?
Yes, when we looked at UiPath and the way we have applied UiPath across enterprise is predominantly for robotic process automation. Now, UiPath has continued to evolve by bringing in more capabilities. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to have more of a low code environment for end-to-end process orchestration, business activity monitoring, best in class process management capabilities, which is easy to deploy with, and we could be training almost every business employee to start their process modeling exercise. So that is where we realized that we don't want to firstly lock all our processes in a technology tool like RPA, which is best in class. But at the same time, we need to bring in Signavio as an enterprise process modeling tool, because enterprise process modeling brings far more richer features than what a technology tool could do. And secondly, we don't want to park our processes in the tool itself where it's being automated, because many times each tool could be solving one part of the process, but we never get end-to-end visibility. And we had to rise the processes beyond technology, and that's where we looked at end-to-end visibility for the processes beyond RPA.
And Vinay, that comes across so clearly with you. This very clear, a great understanding of the role of the end-to-end process and the role of automation in that. And you have done a masterful job of educating all of us today about those trade-offs and really the hierarchy between process and the technology. Let me get another question here. Let me take a look. There are lots of compliments on what you have done, so thank you for all of that. They really appreciate your presentation. Can you talk a little bit about, without disclosing any proprietary information, can you talk a little bit about quantified benefits of hyperautomation in terms of maybe case studies or any customer appreciation? I mean, how you're quantifying your hyperautomation efforts?
Okay, I'll just keep it short. There are 3 different scenarios I'll express. One is we have deployed RPA as a complement to our information and analytics products, which is driving revenues and direct customer value. So multiple banks have started using RPA solutions on top of the information analytics products that we delivered. So that's helping customers to speed up their time to market to deploy our analytics solutions. That's driving revenue for us in terms of additional licensing, and also increasing the value from the products that we develop as commercial products. Secondly, in terms of many different processes that we are deploying in the company, our content operations have been at the heart of our business. As I mentioned, we deal with billions of documents. If you look at the operations team that we have today across different geographies, we are only able to process about a subset of the documents that we carry. In effect, we feel that we are not doing justice, or we could do more value for the customers. And that is where now applying AI, our speed and scale to process documents has almost doubled. And today the customers are getting much higher value in terms of the richer information they are able to get from us. And in some areas, we are able to charge premium for those kind of solutions where we have distinct products created out of automation. So it's again directly impacting revenues, various scalability aspects, and operations where we are continuing to look for scale and efficiencies across the board. So as I said, last year we delivered more than 150 projects between AI, BPM, and RPA, and our collective savings across our revenues and cost savings and scalability were measured as an integrated in terms of how we showed the progress to automation, which helped us to get continued and more enhanced funding for 2020 and continues to be on the high visibility for our CEO directly.
Very good, very good. Vinay, thank you so much for taking the time today to share your expertise, talking about strategy, technology, people. Really wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for all the insights shared, and we'll look forward to continue to learning more from you in future events.
Yeah, thanks, Jose. Appreciate the opportunity. Have a good day.
All right, thank you. So everyone, great to have you here for this session. We're gonna close the webinar now, and as we close the webinar, go ahead and fill out a short survey that's gonna come up on feedback on this session, and we'll start back up at 5 minutes to the top of the hour for another terrific session with Matthew Marino. And Matthew Marino is going to talk about some very practical applications of RPA in driving excellence for the enterprise. So looking forward to that presentation, and we'll see you back here in a few minutes.